Where we left off, Jacob was doing some kind of controlled sheep breeding program to pull one over on Uncle Laban. And Jacob's becoming very wealthy. That should set off a red flag, because when we've seen someone acquire wealth in Genesis, it has immediately led to conflict. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, "Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all his wealth from what belonged to our father." And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. So there's resentment. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." Laban was not with him, but God would be with him. God had made that promise at Bethel many years before this, and now Jacob gets a reminder that God's still faithful. In verse 13, Jacob fills in more detail. He quotes God as saying, "I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me." What was that vow? Let's look back at chapter 28. Remember Jacob's low expectations. If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, he certainly has, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, he got all that and more, so that I return safely to my father's household, he's doing it. Then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. So many years have passed, and God sort of nudges him. Hey, remember that deal we made at Bethel? So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. That gives them some privacy away from Laban. And Jacob begins by making a comparison between their father, Laban, and the God of his father. He says, "Your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me." He says, "Your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times, but God has not allowed him to harm me." Sometimes human fathers reflect God's character by providing, protecting, and being actively present with their children. Other times, fathers fail to different degrees. Rachel and Leah had a father who treated them like currency. Scripture takes the time to point out that this was wrong for him to treat them that way, and that harmful behavior does not reflect what God is like. Then Rachel and Leah replied, "Do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children." So Laban has been irresponsible, distant, abusive, and manipulative. And Scripture gives his daughters a chance to voice their experience. Notice what Scripture doesn't try to do. "Oh, but he's family. He meant well. Other people have it so much worse. Don't air your dirty laundry." We make excuses for patterns of harmful behavior, but God says, no, that was actually wrong for him to treat you that way. Well, Jacob explains that God has been with him through all the trouble that Laban caused, and now it was time to move on. The wives agree. They say, "Do whatever God has told you." They have agency, and they know that it's time to move on. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated, not stolen, in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Like his grandfather Abram, but with a much bigger picture of who God is, Jacob heads toward the promised land. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods, or teraphim. These were some kind of cultic objects used in divination, probably shaped like a human form. Some later rabbis tell us that teraphim could be made from actual human skulls. We know from digs at Jericho that plastered skulls had some kind of cultic significance, so there could be a connection there. But teraphim were mounted and consulted for divine guidance, which is probably why Rachel steals them. She doesn't want the idols helping Laban track them down or giving him special favor. Then verse 20 says, "Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead." On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." Once again, God speaks to an unbeliever. That's something that always gives me hope for people who don't know him yet. Here, Laban is kept from making a rash judgment. Well, Laban reaches Jacob's camp and he says, "What have you done? You've deceived me, and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. I have the power to harm you, but last night the God of your father said to me, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household. But why did you steal my gods?" This is classic manipulative behavior. Sometimes this is called darvo. When a perpetrator is held accountable for abusive behavior, they'll often deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. This often happens if you call out bad behavior or you draw a healthy boundary and someone wants to violate it. Laban doesn't show a hint of awareness that he was cruel to Jacob and Rachel and Leah. He reframes the situation as if he's a hapless victim and Jacob is a big meanie. Was Jacob wrong to leave? No, God told him to leave. Sometimes that's the best option. And drawing healthy boundaries can be really hard for Christians who want to be loving and gracious. Manipulators will use that as leverage and try to make you feel like you're doing something wrong by protecting your family's health and safety. Well, Jacob responds, "I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live." In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. Then the narrator builds up suspense. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the 2 female servants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle, and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period." So he searched, but could not find the household gods. So in Jacob's mind, Laban's accusations are completely unfounded. So he takes Laban to task. "What is my crime?" he asked Laban. "How have I wronged you that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the 2 of us. I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. And you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime, and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for the 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." So Jacob has given his case. Laban looks like an idiot in front of everyone, so he has to save face. He says, "The women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine or about the children they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. So we have a fitting bookend to the journey that started at Bethel, where Jacob's pillar marked the place where heaven met earth. He said to his relatives, "Gather some stones." So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. It's a way of saying, this is a boundary marker, and if this boundary is violated by either party, then all of those present are obligated to respond. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, which means pile of witnesses in Aramaic, and Jacob called it Galaed, which means pile of witnesses in Hebrew. So they take an oath and share a meal, marking a peace treaty, a transition of Jacob's family, the seeds of a future Israel, moving back down into the land of promise.